As Operation Olive Branch continues in Syria, we're looking at Turkey's relationship with Iran and Russia. What does it mean for combat missions inside Syria and for a conflict now in its 7th year? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. Three powers, all with a stake in Syria's conflict. Turkey, Iran and Russia's union, if you can call it that, appears to be a decisive rejection of the United States strategy for Syria. So what's behind the alliance and what does it mean for the region's future?
Operation Olive Branch, Turkey's effort to rid northern Syria of terrorists. It's the latest major development in the Syrian war, now in its 7th year. But away from the battlefield, the geopolitics behind the war are changing. In recent years, Turkey's alliances have shifted. Could the burgeoning relationship between Iran, Turkey and Russia broker a new peace for the region? In 2015, Turkey-Russia relations reached an all-time low. A Russian jet was shot down after allegedly violating Turkish airspace. Only after an apology the following year did the relationship improve.
Известно также, что Анкара принесла извинения за сбитый российский бомбардировщик. С учетом этого имеем в виду в ближайшее время предпринять меры по восстановлению двустороннего сотрудничества.
The two sides have since come together, with a common goal to find peace and restore stability in Syria. Throughout 2017, Turkey, Russia and Iran sponsored the Astana talks, an effort to pick up where Geneva had failed. Following the talks, the three countries solidified their joint efforts to bring about an end to the war in Syria.
А также усилия Турции, как вы знаете, позитивно очень развивается ситуация на самой территории в борьбе с терроризмом.
The rapprochement follows the souring of relations with the US, whose decision to arm YPG terrorists had angered Ankara. Turkey's Operation Olive Branch represents a major departure from US strategy, taking decisive action to protect its borders by forcing out Washington's ally, the YPG. A mission on which Iran and Turkey have found common ground, and one which required Russian agreement. Ankara, Tehran and Moscow could now play a major role in brokering peace in Syria, and upcoming peace talks in Sochi could reinforce their growing significance. Could the new regional triumvirate be the answer to ending the war in Syria?
Pleased to say, joining us via Skype from Istanbul, we have Hakki, political analyst, with us in the studio. Manuel, Langendorf, editor-in-chief of the World Weekly. We have the political analyst Mamoon, Alabbasi, and David Hearst, the editor-in-chief of Middle East Eye. Those peace talks referred to in that scheduled for some time next week, certainly before the end of January. David, let me come to you first of all. What kind of axis is this, the Turkey, Iran, Russia one?
Well, about 6 months ago, I would have said this is a marriage of convenience. Now, I'm not so sure. I think there's something more solid behind it, certainly behind Turkey and Russia's alliance. Both have been pushed into each other's arms by a mutual disappointment of Washington. Certainly that started really to grow legs in Ankara after the US reaction to the coup attempt. But it has grown with each different policy, and as you've said before, this crisis has been triggered by the American statement of setting up a border force on Turkey's border with the YPG that supports the PKK. So the interesting thing about this alliance with Russia and Turkey is that this particular operation could not have been done without Russian permission for Turkish aircraft to use Russian-controlled airspace. The question then is, what is the quid pro quo? What will Russia demand in return? The last time this happened, the journalistic shortcut was to say that Turkey allowed Aleppo to fall. What will the Russians demand in return around Idlib for
Okay,
it?
well, we'll ask you or the others that question in just a moment. But can I bring Iran into this? And we'll come to Istanbul in just a moment. But one of you two, we talked about a triumvirate, and yet David's referring specifically to the Russia-Turkey alliance and the reasons behind it. Does Iran fit neatly into this?
I don't think so. There has been an improvement in the relationship between Iran and Turkey following the coup attempt, because Iran was one of the first countries to condemn the coup and express its support for the Turkish government. So that has diffused tensions. But in Syria, basically, they back very opposing sides that really the Syrian oppositions cannot stand Iran, and the Assad regime will not tolerate the Syrian opposition, which is backed by Turkey. So there is not much to reconciliate inside Syria.
So where does Iran fit into this? Because the three of them, the three countries and the leaders of the three countries, are all saying we stand by the talks that are coming up next week. Putin was saying we believe positively that both Iran and Turkey have got a part to play in this. Is this just sort of Diplo speak?
Well, I think when we look at Iran, the key is to understand that Iran wants to preserve the gains it has made with the regime and with Russian help. And so if that means a political settlement favorable to the regime, and that can be brought about by increased leverage via Russia over Ankara, then that would be in Iran's favor.
Hakki, I'm wondering how it sits with Turkey that both Russia and Iran want Assad to remain in power, and Turkey said absolutely not.
Oh, you are right, but when you are going to have a meeting in Astana or anywhere related to Astana process, you need Shia represented on the table. That is Iran. I mean, it is not only the Baas regime they are representing by proxy, but they are also representing the Shia people, Shia population there. Also, you need Turkey as the representative of Sunni people in Iraq, and these two proxies, and Turkey and Iran has to get well in one way or another. But if you look at the Turkish relations with Iran in the long run, during the last 6 years, vis-a-vis Syrian events or murders committed by the regime in Syria, Turkey is not seeing eye to eye with Iran. It is difficult to accept any country representing the Assad regime in any way, in any discussion, because they are killing their own people. And Iran is in other way, looking the other way when those murders are being committed. So
Operation Olive Branch was launched against the YPG, Kurdish YPG, and Kurds are being invited to these talks. We can't call them peace talks as such yet, but the conference in Russia. That could prove a bit difficult, could it?
Yes, it is. It would. First of all, when you refer to YPG as Syrian Kurds, actually it is not exactly true. They are Turkish Kurds. They are Kurds who cannot speak Arabic. They are people coming from Turkey, and Turkish forces know all the leaders by name because of their fight in Turkey. However, you have legitimate Kurdish forces, Kurdish people in Syria. They have been denied even citizenship until very recently, and they have to be represented on that desk, on that table strongly. Turkey is going to do that, I think, and it has nothing to do, Astana has nothing to do with what is happening in the region right now. It is expanding to Münbiç area. It's not limited to Afrin anymore. But in this way or another. If you take YPG and PYD from the picture, probably you will have better representation for Kurds of Syria.
Yeah. Do you want to talk anybody, excuse me, at this table about what is suggested there, that this perhaps deeper incursion, perhaps of the Turkish forces moving to the east and thereby not only expanding the area in which they're operating, but potentially coming into physical contact with American special forces who are there, and the Times newspaper this morning writing about a small group of British forces who are operating in that area. Who wants to pick that one up?
Well, I think in general, this Afrin operation is very likely not to stay limited to that area. And what many people predict, I think, is that we will see an escalation of violence, which will also impact any efforts, for example, backed by Russia, to find a political settlement. So in the past, Russia has been working towards calming the conflict and getting everyone, not literally everyone, but important forces to the table to come to a political settlement. Now, with this operation and potentially this operation moving east, I think we could see an escalation.
Do you think it could escalate?
Easily, yes. I mean, it certainly could escalate with PKK actions in Turkey. And it could also escalate if there was a really big fight for Afrin itself. If the Kurds rushed in numbers, PYD rushed in numbers to fight for the city in the same way that they didn't fight for Kirkuk, I think there could be a really big bust-up. I'm not sure what the Turkish political objective and strategy is. Certainly in previous operations it was to deny a continuous connection to the Mediterranean and also to limit the enclaves. But neither of these operations, of the two previous operations in Syria, actually involved a head-to-head clash with the PYD. This is the first time it's going to happen.
Mamoon, come back to you in just a moment. But Hakki in Istanbul, David wonders about the political motive behind that, behind what is happening. But we must also ask about this possible or predicted escalation if things go wrong. What are your thoughts?
First of all, the Turkish political expectations from this operation is very easy. I mean, you remember the wedge Turkish forces had driven last year doing this Jarabulus operation. This really stopped the expansion of this pipeline-shaped Kurdish state, so-called Kurdish state, into the Mediterranean. Now Turks are trying to cut off this little pocket left behind. I think it's nothing, and
therefore, do you believe it is not going to escalate because that is the simple objective, and once that's achieved, if that's achieved, then it'll be a drawback?
No, only it will escalate to the Münbiç area, which is on the western side of Euphrates, and the Turks will stop on the Euphrates. I think they are not going to the east at this time or ever, because the declared political the borders of this so-called Kurdish state.
Okay, let's come back, because we're really particularly talking about Turkey, Iran and Russia. If you want to say something on what's been said so far, please do, then I've got a question.
Sure. I think there's a fear that it could escalate. The YPG are reportedly getting reinforcements from areas through the regime. So they are transporting reinforcements with the help of the regime. And the YPG previously had the help of Russia. So the fact that there are problems now in Afrin and that there's a green light from Russia doesn't mean that it's a permanent green light for every anti-YPG operation in Turkey.
I suppose the only thing we can say at the moment is we just don't know.
Yeah, but the problem with Afrin, as opposed to Manbij, is that Afrin has a Kurdish majority, whereas Manbij have lots of dissatisfied Arab residents who are not happy with the YPG. But then the problem with Manbij is that it has US forces that won't allow a Turkish incursion. So it's really complicated.
Okay, so Russia's become the heavyweight in this. The US to some extent has been sidelined. If Russia succeeds in getting what it would like to see, which is Assad remaining in power, where does that leave Turkey?
At the start of the Syrian revolution, they backed it fully. People were thinking that this is not going to last for long, and they hosted over 3 million refugees. They backed the opposition. Things seemed all going well, but then there were an increase in terror attacks, both by ISIS and PKK affiliates inside Turkey. Then the attempted coup, which left Western capitals not so solidly condemning it, which left Turkey not so sure about its NATO allies. That the Russians jumped in the occasion to cement their ties with Turkey. So Turkey now is thinking about its own survival, its own internal problems. Externally,
and as long as that area in the north of Syria is not populated with people that the Turks believe are out to harm them, they would be happy with Syria in what shape?
At the moment, they don't have much of a choice. They are really managing the disasters that are happening. This is not going the way that they wanted. The way that they wanted it was a democratic, free Syria for everybody, with free representation of the Kurds, not being hijacked by the likes of the YPG, etc., etc. This is not going to happen. So now it's, first of all, let me defend what I have. There could have been civil war in Turkey in 2006. So priority number one is stop terror inside Turkey.
I'll come to you, David, in a minute, but I'd just like to bring Hakki in if I can. Is Turkey's stance not lending weight to Russia's dominance of the region?
Well, in a sense, yes, because Turkey has put Russia and Iran as the legitimate players or legitimate actors of international problem right now. Otherwise, it was United States and its allies trying to find a solution. But when I hear the words like civil war in Turkey or Turkey being unhappy with Kurdish presence in Syria or anything, I don't feel easy. I mean, first of all, there was no civil war in Turkey. Only a packet of Kurdish terrorists doing urban guerrilla warfare against Turkish army. Turkish people, regular Turkish people, never ever participated in those fights. I mean, you never saw a civilian closing his shop.
Okay,
or his
if we could get away from that, it was only talked about the potential for civil unrest.
Had the coup succeeded.
Had the coup succeeded, which we know it did not. So, Hakki, the question is, Turkey here is lending weight to Russian dominance of the region, and is that a dangerous thing?
It is a dangerous thing, and it is obviously dangerous things, and Turkish government right now are feeling the obligation to play with them this ball of game. Please look at the reaction of Turkish officials yesterday. There was this brief announcement from the Secretary of State Tillerson. It made almost all Turkish officials very happy to see that the United States was coming back to the table, to the ball game and everything. Today, almost everybody in Turkey is very anxious to hear what's going to happen with the phone call President Trump is going to place to the President Erdogan. It's going to happen in a couple of hours, and everybody is anxiously waiting to hear from Mr. Trump that they are going to cut their ties with YPG and everything. We know, or at least I assume, that Russia promised some sort of loose federation, as in Iraq, in Syria, to Kurds. Turkey will never be very much worried about such thing happening in the east of Euphrates. Kurds are people. They are the people of Syria, and they have all the right to govern their own business.
Okay, David Hearst, you wanted to jump in.
Well, yes, just to pick up on both Mamoon's point and your point as well, that this is an incredibly mobile situation. And we're not talking about a Russia-Turkey alliance that is cemented. We're talking about shifting alliances and shifting statements. Turkey knows that Trump actually did not want to support the YPG, and it was as you like, the American military that had this relationship with them. Erdogan also knows that military-to-military relationships are not that good for him politically, and I'm talking about all the American generals that had contacts with Gulenist generals in the Turkish army. So this is a very mobile situation. Certainly, I absolutely agree that Turkey does not want to drift that far away from America, because that's where it feels its heart and soul is. It still feels quite a Western country.
And it is in NATO.
And it is in NATO, and there's no suggestion, I think, that Turkey wants to abandon NATO, or indeed, it used actually its NATO membership to get missiles and an anti-missile defense system in place in southern Turkey when they thought they'd get missiles over from Syria. I think what's happening is Russia wants peace now, having caused so much mayhem and civilian bloodshed. It now wants peace, and Turkey is absolutely essential for that. So I think this is like a rearrangement of the dining room table slightly before another round of peace.
Do you agree with that assessment, that Turkey is essential for that?
I absolutely would. I think without Turkey's influence over certain groups still operating in northern Syria, it would be very difficult to forge peace. And I just wanted to add to that point. I think in part what we're seeing is, as David pointed out, is a different priorities being focused on by, for example, Turkey. So of course, we talked about how Turkey opposed Assad heavily, especially at the beginning of the conflict. Later on, it moved more towards focusing on what they see as the Kurdish problem. And that in part has enabled this, as I would agree with, sort of stable but also...
And there's David saying that Turkey's very happy now to see the United States perhaps coming back into it. Would it be too far of a suggestion to say that Turkey's perhaps played both sides off, one against the other?
No. I think it's the Russians who are playing everybody against each other.
Absolutely.
No, Turkey very much wants the US on board and on its side, but the US isn't delivering in that sense, especially with regards to the YPG. At the end, Turkey, if it stands alone against Russia, diplomatically, against Russia and Iran, it's going to be much weaker, because it's the only side that's representing the uprising now. It's just Turkey. The United States is focused on anti-ISIS operations and, as a consequence, supporting the YPG. Iran is supporting the regime, and the regime is having deals with the YPG. Russia is supporting the regime and the YPG while talking to Turkey. The only side left now, even the Gulf states have more or less left the uprising. The only side supporting the uprising now is Turkey.
And the other thing to mention is to add to Mamoon's point, is that Turkey and Iran do not have the same vision about the future of Assad. Iran's support is far more sectarian based. It's talking about Shia, and Turkey's view is quite different about Assad, and it's still pushing for a process.
So there'll be a fracture in the relationship at some point, if there is a relationship at all, really, between...
Well, I'm not sure there will ever be an agreement, but what I'm thinking of is that we're moving towards a de facto partition of Syria.
And they have to talk. They have to talk, because the opposing side, you can't have a ceasefire if they don't talk. The Assad regime and the opposition forces are fighting.
Hakki, the de facto partition of the country, presumably with Assad in power in around Damascus and the south of the country, and something totally different up by the northern border.
First of all, this partition, the very word partition, would give highs to Turkish authorities right now. I mean, it is not acceptable. However, Turkey started talking to Syrian regime last week. They informed Syrian government that they were going to move into Afrin, even though they did it through Russia. But hey, it was talking after all. However, Turks are never ever going to accept the Bashar al-Assad regime again as a legitimate leader of Syria. When you kill almost 250,000 of your citizens, it is difficult to be accepted again as leader. But right now, there is this de facto partition in the country. Turkey has to deal with it, and they are doing their best, pushing YPG or whoever going to represent Kurds after Astana to the east of Euphrates. It is next to Iraq, and that's acceptable, that's okay. This Afrin operation is not totally aimless. Turkish army is now going to keep this direct contact to the Arab land with Turkey. So Turks will be moving freely to Syria, through Syria, to other Arab lands after this operation.
Okay, quick thought,
Just-
Manuel. Yes,
just
yes.
quickly,
If you don't mind, make it quick.
I think we have to remember that still Tehran and Moscow are opposed to Syria's partition because it could threaten its interests and the gains it has made. So I wouldn't be too quick to jump sort of to a... there is a de facto partition, but whether it will cement is a different question.
I think that what's become clear is that you're all experts in the field, and yet nobody really quite knows where it's going. And we've felt the same way for almost 7 years now. You've been watching a Roundtable special on the events in Syria, particularly Operation Olive Branch, launched by Turkish troops earlier this week. TRT World is where you'll get the very best coverage of events in that region from me, David Foster, and the Roundtable team, and from my guests. And thanks to my guests. Hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.